Enlightenment is not what you think, a Buddhist wisdom. Why we misunderstand enlightenment. We often picture enlightenment as something distant and dramatic. Maybe it looks like someone glowing with wisdom, untouched by ordinary life, always calm, always above it all. This image isn't rare, it's deeply familiar. Our minds are built to search for something bigger, something better. That desire for transformation, for perfection, naturally spills into how we imagine awakening. We turn it into something magical, something to be gained, like a new superpower or a perfect state we can finally possess. One of the most common ideas is the dream of becoming a perfect version of ourselves. Completely calm, totally in control, free from flaws or fear. That longing runs deep. We want to escape uncertainty, to never be hurt again, to finally feel whole. But this isn't what the Buddha pointed to. He never described enlightenment as the creation of a flawless self or the gain of any external power. These fantasies are subtle forms of clinging. They distract us from the actual process of freedom, letting go of the need to become someone else. Then there's the idea that awakening brings a life without difficulty, a kind of permanent vacation from pain. We imagine that once we're enlightened, nothing will bother us anymore, and we'll never feel sad or confused again. But this, too, is a misunderstanding. Life, by its nature, will always include change, loss, aging, discomfort. Even an awakened person experiences physical pain, faces challenges, and feels the weight of others' suffering. The difference lies not in what happens, but in how it's met. The awakened mind no longer adds layers of inner resistance or confusion. It feels clearly, responds wisely, but doesn't spin stories of fear or frustration around experience. It's tempting to believe that enlightenment will somehow erase all our problems. But this hope itself is part of the illusion. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That idea runs parallel to the Buddha's teaching. Awakening doesn't remove the world. It removes the habits of mind that turn pain into suffering and change into fear. These ideas, becoming perfect, living problem-free, are reflections of deeper mental habits. At the root of them is craving, our need to reach, grasp, fix, escape. And beneath that craving is ignorance, a basic not seeing, a confusion about what freedom really is. We try to shrink something vast and subtle into something the self can possess. But true awakening isn't a possession. It isn't an achievement. It's a clear seeing of what's always been true, once the noise quiets. In the end, our biggest obstacle may not be the world around us, but the mind's own shadows. The more we chase a fantasy of enlightenment, the further we move from the truth that awakening isn't about becoming someone else. It's about no longer being fooled by who you thought you had to be. What awakening really means. Now that we've looked at the ways our minds distort the idea of enlightenment, let's turn toward what awakening truly is. In the Buddha's teachings, awakening, what's often called bodhi or nirvana, is not something added to your life. It's not a feeling you gain or a special state you enter. At its essence, it is the complete ending of suffering. That's it. No fireworks, no dramatic transformation, just the quiet stopping of what causes us to struggle. The Buddha called this freedom the unconditioned. It's not born, not made, not built by anything. It doesn't arise from effort, belief, or emotion. It's like silence, not something you create, but what's naturally there when all the noise falls away. In the same way, awakening is what remains when craving, aversion, and delusion are no longer driving the mind. The Buddha said it simply: the destruction of craving, the destruction of aversion, the destruction of delusion, this is nirvana. It's not poetic, it's precise. This kind of freedom brings a peace that doesn't rely on circumstances. It's not a mood or a high. It's a deep stability that isn't shaken by gain or loss, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. This peace doesn't come from fixing your life. It comes from removing the roots of inner turmoil. It's a stillness that doesn't collapse when life gets difficult. It's happiness without conditions, because nothing external has to happen for it to be there. One of the most important aspects of this awakening is the insight into non-self, anatta. This doesn't mean that you disappear. It means you see clearly that what you've always taken to be a fixed self is actually a flowing process. The thoughts, memories, emotions, and roles you cling to, they arise, change, and pass. When you stop defending this imaginary center, a huge burden falls away. The constant effort to protect or prove me dissolves, and with it, much of the suffering disappears too. This is why the Buddha said, "Not mine, not I am, not myself." These aren't abstract ideas. They are reflections you can test for yourself. Watch how the thought I arises. Watch how it fades. Just that quiet noticing begins to soften the illusion. Over time, the grip of identity loosens. And in its place, there's space. Space for calm, compassion, and clarity. Another dimension of awakening is seeing how everything is deeply connected. This is the principle of dependent origination. It means nothing exists on its own. Every thought, every feeling, every event arises because of countless causes and conditions. When this truth is seen clearly, rigid beliefs begin to fall apart. We stop seeing the world as separate pieces and start sensing it as a flowing whole. That's why the Buddha said, "One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma." It's not a metaphor. It's a direct pointing to reality as it is. And perhaps the most surprising thing about awakening is how ordinary it feels. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make you superhuman. What it gives you is space. Space from the confusion that once ran your life. Space to respond instead of react. Space to feel fully without clinging. Enlightenment isn't about becoming something else. It's about realizing that what you've been looking for isn't somewhere far away. It's already here, underneath the noise, behind the striving, waiting to be recognized. How awakening happens, the path of practice. Now that we've explored what awakening really means, the next question naturally arises. How do we get there? If enlightenment is the end of suffering, how does one move towards such a profound shift? It's not something that arrives through hope or waiting. It's not a lightning bolt from the sky. Instead, it's a gradual process, an active journey of training the mind. Think of it like slowly untangling a very tight knot. You work with patience and care, thread by thread. This is how the Buddha described the path: a steady unfolding, a release from the habits that keep us bound. The Buddha offered a clear and practical training. It has 3 essential elements: ethical conduct, mental cultivation, and insight. Each one supports the others. Together, they create the conditions for true freedom to arise. We begin with ethical living, sila. This means choosing to live in a way that doesn't harm yourself or others. When your actions are guided by honesty, compassion, and restraint, the mind becomes lighter. There's no hidden burden of guilt or regret to carry. This isn't about morality in the rigid sense. It's about building a foundation of peace within. When your daily life is grounded in kindness and care, the mind becomes more settled, more able to rest. From this ethical base, we move into mental training, samadhi. This is where practices like breath awareness come in. You learn to steady the attention, to bring the mind back from its wandering. Over time, this focus deepens into stillness. And in that stillness, clarity begins to grow. It's like water in a pond. When the surface is calm, you can see all the way to the bottom. But this stillness isn't the goal itself. It prepares the ground. It gives the mind the strength and stability it needs to look deeply. It's important to note, calm states, even very peaceful ones, don't uproot suffering on their own. They can temporarily quiet the noise, but the roots of confusion may still remain. That's why stillness must give way to insight. And that leads us to the third aspect: panya, wisdom, or insight. With a steady and calm mind, you begin to observe reality directly. You see clearly how everything arises and passes away. You notice how grasping leads to stress. You begin to understand that the sense of a fixed me is built from passing thoughts and sensations. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's direct seeing. It happens moment by moment in ordinary experience, watching a thought come and go, feeling an emotion rise and fade. As this clear seeing deepens, it starts to cut through the roots of suffering. The knot begins to loosen. This whole path takes effort, but it's a specific kind of effort, not the kind that strains or forces. It's more like learning a delicate skill. At first there's awkwardness, struggle, repetition, but over time, something shifts. You don't have to think so hard. The movements become natural, like learning to ride a bike. You wobble, you fall, but eventually, the balance takes care of itself. Similarly, on this path, the effort is to understand, to learn how to let go, how to see clearly. Once those inner skills take root, peace becomes less of a goal and more of a natural state. Even the Taoist master Zhuangzi described this kind of natural ease. He spoke of a craftsman who worked without strain, not because he tried harder, but because he understood so deeply what he was doing that action flowed effortlessly. This is the kind of ease that comes, not from avoiding effort, but from having practiced so well that resistance falls away. So the path is not about becoming someone new or gaining something extra. It's not about mystical powers or dramatic changes. It's about deep internal change. As the mind becomes more clear, more open, more honest, it naturally becomes free. The knot untangles, the weight lifts, and what's left is a peace that's not dependent on anything at all. The awakened presence, living in unconditional freedom. After walking the path of practice, one might ask, what does awakening actually look like in daily life? Not as a distant idea, but as something lived. The answer isn't dramatic. It's not about becoming flawless or untouched by life. It's a quiet, stable clarity that grows from within and changes how a person moves through the world. Instead of reacting from habit or fear, the awakened mind responds from presence. Instead of clinging to roles, possessions, or fixed views, there is ease and lightness. Emotions still arise, but they're not fed by confusion. Kindness flows naturally, not out of obligation, but because there's no tight self to defend. And most of all, fear, especially the fear of loss or death, loses its grip. Not because these things are denied, but because the illusion of control has dropped away. This kind of freedom isn't exclusive. It doesn't belong to one religion, one tradition, or one kind of person. The capacity to awaken is part of being human. It doesn't matter where you're from or what you believe. The truth doesn't ask for your belief. It only asks for your attention. Real awakening is not found in ideas. It's something you see for yourself, in direct experience. That's why the Buddha didn't say, "Believe me." He said, "Come and see." So how do you know if someone is truly awake? Or if awakening is beginning to take root in your own life? It's not measured by spiritual talk or how much someone meditates. Look for something simpler, a deep calm, even when things fall apart. A compassion that reaches everyone without needing reward. A steadiness that's not cold, but warm. And above all, a freedom from automatic reactions. Because there is space between what happens and how one responds. In the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha gave a radical teaching. He said, "Don't follow something just because it's tradition, or because someone you admire says it. Test it. Live it. When you see for yourself that something leads to suffering, let it go. When you see that something leads to peace and well-being, embrace it." This is not just permission. It's a responsibility to trust your own clarity. Awakening isn't a hidden state reserved for saints or sages. It's not marked by perfection, but by presence. It shows up in how a person meets difficulty without collapsing, how they offer kindness without needing anything in return, how they stay rooted in clarity when others are lost in confusion. These aren't special effects. They're signs of a mind that is no longer at war with itself. And this potential is in you, not someday. Now. In every moment you pause, observe, and choose clarity over habit. In every time you respond with patience instead of reaction. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about finally living from the deepest, most unburdened part of who you already are.